But I'd like to welcome you this afternoon on behalf of the National Transit Institute. Thank you for participating in National Transit Database 2019 Safety and Security Reporting Updates webinar. The National Transit Institute develops, promotes, and delivers training and education programs for the public transit industry in the United States. We are pleased to have Anne Singleton, Bisulca, and James Overbeek as our presenters. Anne Singleton is a Senior Safety and Security Analyst for the NTD program since 2009. Anne has been involved with several FTA initiatives, such as the State Safety Oversight Program, the Computer Rail Safety Study, and the Transit Bus Safety and Security Program in a variety of roles. Prior to Anne's work with FTA, she was a software instructor and database developer. Bisulca joined the NTD team in January 2018. He is a graduate of James Madison University and is a validation analyst for the Safety and Security module of the National Transit Database, recently making the transition from the annual module. James Overbeek joined the NTD team in 2015. He is a graduate of Randolph-Macon College and currently works as a validation analyst for the Safety and Security module of the National Transit Database. Today's webinar consists of Anne and Stephen presenting their material, followed by a question and answer session at the end. You can participate in the discussion by using the chat pod that is located in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. James and I will be monitoring the chat during the presentation. Any questions James can't help you with in the chat pod will be saved, and I will moderate them at the end of the session. If you haven't already downloaded or printed out a copy of the presentation handouts that was emailed to you, you can click on the handout document in the upper left-hand corner of your screen under Handouts, which will start the download, or you can copy and paste the link under the Notes section. It's not clickable. You have to copy and paste into your browser, and you should be able to download it that way. I will now turn the presentation over to Anne.
Thank you, Lori. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Apologize again for the slight technical difficulties we had. So the session, we're going to cover 2019 Safety and Security Reporting Updates. Excuse me. Next few slides will provide an overview of what we will discuss today. We have a couple of clarifications. The first pertains to reporting attempted suicides, and the second on individuals transported for mental health evaluation. We have several form changes. You may have already noticed that some of these changes have already taken effect in the NTD program. All of these topics listed here will be discussed in greater detail as we progress through the session. We have revised the question, were transit vehicles involved in this event, that's shown on setup screen 1 when you're reporting your events, your major events. On the basic information screen, we've added 2 new event type options. We'll tell you why and what we added there. We've added these same 2 options to the personal security event form. And for non-transit collisions, we've added a new location option and a new collision width option. And then we revised the wording on another option, just to mention. There have been no changes to system navigation, the definition of a reportable event, nor the NTD reporting thresholds. Finally, we want to provide some additional guidance and clarifications on a few topics. First, we'll review the information that should be included in all event descriptions. We'll review the vehicle towing threshold for non-rail mode collisions. For rail mode, we will review reporting serious and non-serious injuries and provide some additional guidance there. Reporting trespassers, which is most common in rail mode, but also does pertain to non-rail mode reporting. And also for rail mode, we'll be discussing substantial damage threshold, and for reporting rail maintenance vehicle collisions. These are just a few things that we've noticed can be a challenge for some of the agencies or easily misunderstood. Provide additional clarity on these points. As Lori mentioned, James, Stephen, and I are your presenters for today. James is actually going to be covering the chat box for us while Stephen and I talk today. Maggie Schilling, our program manager, and Joe Eldridge, the NTD project manager, are not in attendance with us today. So let's take a look at some of these clarifications. The first clarification pertains to attempted suicide. The definition of an attempted suicide has been changed as you see on the slide. The attempt of the act and the intent to inflict self-harm must be accounted for by a third party. Please be sure to include all corroborating information in the event description. This really helps us validate the report and ensure that it was a valid attempted suicide. Additionally, if there's no clear attempt and a person was transported only for mental health evaluation, this is reported on the non-major monthly summary report. Now we're mentioning this here as we talk about attempted suicides, since we've seen reports where of an attempted suicide where the person stated that they wanted to harm themselves, yet there was no actual attempt made. So the person was transported to be evaluated, but it was not an actual clear attempt at an attempted suicide. For our clarifications, the new things, so we're going to go over the form changes in a little bit more detail. So the first change is on setup screen 2, the threshold question, which reads, were transit vehicles involved in this event? So we modified this slightly to include the word revenue. Were transit revenue vehicles involved in this event? This change is designed to help the reporter determine if the event should be reported as a transit collision or if it should be reported as a non-transit collision that does not involve a revenue vehicle. We're going to touch more on this when we get into the high-level clarifications later on. Here's a snapshot of where that question is, and you can see the revision has already been launched in the system. We added 2 new options to the basic information screen when you're reporting a collision. So you're only going to see these on the collision basic information screen. You will now see that there's a checkbox there for suicide and attempted suicide. This is used to capture these suicide and attempted suicide events on the event level rather than just collecting the number of related attempted suicide injuries or suicide fatalities. For rail mode, this also allows us to close the gap so that we can capture attempted suicides when the individual is not transported. Train contact with the person is automatically a reportable event, as our rail reporters know. If the person is not transported, then there's no injury form, so we were unable to capture that this was an attempted suicide without a transport. So now having this on the basic information screen will close that gap, and we can capture these attempted suicides where there was no transport. Then you would still be sure to check the appropriate, when you check the box on the basic information screen, attempted suicide or suicide, make sure that you also identify that on the injury or fatality form accordingly. So those 2 points should corroborate each other. So here you can see where we've added these 2 options on the basic information screen for suicide report, for collision reports. Attempted suicide and suicides not involving impact with the transit vehicle have long been collected on the personal security form. The attempted suicide and suicide options were on this form in 2015 and prior, but then we removed them in 2016 when we started collecting these events when there was impact with a transit vehicle on the collision report. We thought it would cause less confusion to remove them from the form, the security form. But now we're seeing the need where we need to capture these again on that form, so we've added attempted suicide and suicide back to the personal security event form. And again, you would still collect the, identify that person as an attempted, the injury as an attempted suicide or the fatality as a suicide on the injury or fatality form accordingly. So here you can see where we added these two options back to the personal security event. Now remember, this time for this, you only use this when it doesn't involve a transit vehicle. So if the act happens in the station or something like that. Okay, non-transit collisions. Now some of you may not be quite as familiar with these event types as others. A non-transit collision is one that does not involve a transit revenue vehicle, whether it's in service or not, yet it occurs on transit property and it meets the reporting threshold. For example, a car in a transit parking lot strikes a person or a vehicle causing an injury requiring transport, or a maintenance vehicle collides with anything other than a revenue vehicle on transit property. We're going to discuss more about the rail maintenance options a little bit later in the presentation when we get to the high-level clarifications. So as you may know, to create a non-transit collision, on setup screen 2, you would answer this question you would answer the question no, where it says were transit revenue vehicles involved in this event. And this again is one of the reasons why we added revenue into that that threshold question. So if you say no there, that's going to generate the non-transit collision. Then on the non-transit collision event form, we added a new location of non-revenue facility. This selection would also be used if the non-revenue location was not actually a facility, but it happened in an area such as the yard. We also changed the wording to the location parking facilities to revenue facility parking facility, just to match how it's presented on our other forms, just for consistency. Additionally, we also added a new collision with selection of non-revenue vehicle. You would select this option if the event involved a non-revenue maintenance or service vehicle. For example, if a maintenance vehicle collided with an object on transit property resulting in a threshold, such as an injury, you would report the collision with as a non-revenue vehicle. On the same form, you would include one other vehicle involved, because it asks the number of vehicles involved, for the maintenance vehicle. And on the subsequent other vehicle subform that's generated, you would choose the selection of non-revenue maintenance vehicle as the vehicle type. So here you can see the rewording of the revenue facility parking facility and the inclusion of non-revenue facility, and then down with the collision with the non-revenue vehicle selection. All right, so at this point, I'm going to turn this over to Stephen, and he'll take us through the rest of the presentation.
Event descriptions. Please include details that will corroborate the data points on the various forms. The description need not be long, but should include what occurred, where it occurred, if vehicles were towed, and who and how many injuries and/or fatalities. Also, when reporting collisions, if there was no property damage to any involved vehicle or objects, please add a confirming statement to the event description. When we see no damage reported, we will question it if there is no corroborating statement. Overall, if the description is incomplete, we may have to return the report for additional information. Also, as we mentioned earlier, suicides, attempted suicide events need additional data to include the intent of self-harm and the attempt. Please include an eyewitness statement or police report verification. However, please do not send us police reports. In a non-rail mode collision, towing of either the involved transit or other vehicle due to disabling damage makes the collision automatically reportable. The threshold question setup screen 2 reads, did this collision result in a towaway? If this is true, you would answer yes if the vehicle is towed for disabling damage. Answer no if the vehicle is towed based on company policy or by operator request. Then on the transit vehicle or other vehicle form, You will corroborate by answering yes to the question, was this vehicle towed from the scene due to disabling damage as a result of the collision? We are going to provide some clarity to the threshold question by changing the wording to include the words due to disabling damage to reduce any confusion. First, since we have a combined audience, please note that this refers to only rail mode. Non-rail mode injuries are referred to only as injuries, though the definition is the same as listed here under non-serious. For rail reporters, we thought it might be helpful to include a side-by-side table comparing serious and non-serious injuries. Serious injuries require hospitalization for more than 48 hours, commencing within 7 days from the date of the event. Result in a fracture of any bone except simple fractures of fingers, toes, or nose, cause severe hemorrhages, nerve, muscle, or tendon damage, involves an internal organ, or involves second or third degree burns, or any burns affecting more than 5% of the body. We are often asked how one is to determine if nerve damage or internal injuries occurred with the HIPAA laws in place. We understand it might be difficult, and police reports or other eyewitness counts may be helpful. Your claims department may also be a useful source of information. One point of confusion may be that serious injuries do not require transport away from the scene, which may appear counterintuitive. Consider that the person sought medical attention later in the day, as agencies are often notified. As in the example, if the person sought medical attention within the 7-day period and stayed in the hospital for more than 48 hours, it is reported as a serious injury. Be sure to check the transported for medical attention checkbox on the injury form accordingly. On the other hand, a non-serious injury requires transport from the scene for medical attention. You see a few examples here. Be sure to check the transported for medical attention checkbox on the injury form for non-serious injuries. We want to provide some clarity on trespassers. As many of you probably have noticed, the trespasser checkbox is located on the injury and fatality forms. Trespassing events are not reported on the event level, and trespassing is not a threshold. Rather, we collect trespasser injuries or fatalities. For example, a person may be trespassing by crossing the tracks in a station, and when they reach the opposite platform, an officer arrests that person. In the process of the arrest, the officer is assaulted and transported for medical attention, but the perpetrator was not injured. The trespasser box should not be checked because the injury was to the officer who was not trespassing. Here are a couple of examples in determining trespassing. If a person jumps onto tracks, perhaps in front of a vehicle, or they go under a platform, or are on an exclusive right-of-way, they are trespassing. However, if a person falls or is pushed onto tracks, they are not considered trespassing. These examples only pertain to rail alignments, but a trespasser could also be in an unauthorized area of a station, such as an employee-designated area. If there are police reports, eyewitness statements, etc. to account for trespassing, please include the information in the description. Using the word trespasser or trespassing is very helpful to the analyst. If the person is clearly trespassing, select the trespasser box on the injury or fatality form in addition to selecting the appropriate person type. You are to report the person type and/or if they are trespassing. If a person jumps from a station platform to the track area, report the person type as person waiting or leaving from transit. And be sure to check the trespasser box. If a person is walking along the tracks, report the person type as pedestrian walking along road, as this refers to tracks as well, and you would also select the trespasser box. Right-of-ways that are in mixed traffic, such as streetcars, cable cars, and some light rail systems, may be harder to determine if the person was trespassing. This is where the eyewitness accounts, perhaps from the train operator, are very helpful. If a person intentionally violates warning signage, crossbars, and other restrictive devices, they are considered trespassing. For example, if the person was in the crosswalk, you would report this person type as pedestrian crossing a crosswalk, and you would check the trespasser box accordingly. The pedestrian other selection is used when individuals are laying, sitting, kneeling, or otherwise found on the tracks, and in this case you would check the trespasser box accordingly. If needed, you would also select the suicide or attempted suicide box accordingly. For rail mode reporters, another point of confusion can be the substantial damage threshold. This may be that it does not relate to a dollar amount. As you see, the substantial damage threshold has two parts: damage to any involved facilities, vehicles, equipment, rolling stock, or infrastructure that has disrupted the operations of the rail transit agency, and the second part adversely affects the structural strength, performance, or operating characteristics of the object or vehicle requiring towing, rescue, on-site maintenance, or immediate removal prior to safe operation. In determining substantial damage, you want to exclude minor damage, such as cracked windows, dents, bends, or small punctured holes, broken lights, mirrors, catenary, third rail equipment, or removal of the transit vehicle from service for minor repair or maintenance, testing, or video and event recorder downloading. You would also exclude personal property, for example, laptops and cell phones, the cost of accident or criminal investigation, medical claims, or litigation. You can find a complete list in the 2018 Safety and Security Policy Manual available on the NTD website, or the 2019 Safety and Security Policy Manual, which will be available on January 1st. So, at first glance, both the inclusions and the exclusions refer to on-site maintenance and removal from service. Also, most agencies have policies to remove vehicles from service for post-accident inspections or evaluations. When applying the substantial damage threshold, consider both parts to the substantial damage criteria, that it includes damage to vehicles or objects and on-site maintenance or removal from service prior to safe operations. The exclusions from service for minor repairs or maintenance does not refer to damage in this context. Regarding the towing portion in the substantial damage criteria, this does not pertain to towing the train, but does refer to the other vehicle involved towed due to disabling damage in order to meet the threshold. Let's look at a few examples. There is a mid-block collision with no injuries or fatalities, yet the car is towed due to disabling damage. You would select the substantial damage option on Setup Screen 2. Then, from the list of damage identifier options, choose to non-transit property only, vehicles, facilities, equipment, rolling stock, or infrastructure. Then, on the other vehicle form, answer yes to the question, was this vehicle towed from the scene due to disabling damage as a result of the collision? Here we have another mid-block collision. This time the driver is transported for medical attention and her vehicle is towed to remove it from the street. This does not meet the substantial damage threshold, but the event does meet the injury threshold. So you would report the event, and on the other vehicle form, answer no to the question, was this vehicle towed from the scene due to disabling damage as a result of the collision? Reporting rail maintenance vehicle collisions. We have noticed that reporting maintenance vehicle collisions can be a challenge, which is why we made some changes to the form as we discussed earlier. First, as a reminder, any collision between a rail transit vehicle and a second rail transit vehicle, which means revenue vehicles, or rail transit non-revenue vehicle, is automatically reportable. So if two revenue vehicles in or out of service collide, report the event as a rail transit collision and include two trains. If a revenue vehicle collides with a non-revenue maintenance vehicle, report as a rail transit collision and include one train and one other vehicle. If the non-revenue maintenance vehicle collides with anything other than a revenue train, such as another maintenance vehicle, work train, prime loader, etc., and the event meets a reporting threshold, report the event as a non-transit collision by selecting No on Setup Screen 2 to the question, were transit revenue vehicles involved in this event, and include one other vehicle for each maintenance vehicle included. That concludes the presentation. Do we have any more questions?
Again, if you have any questions, type it in the chat box, or if your question was missed, I'm scrolling back to look, but you can, let us know that too.
While somebody's typing, I'll just mention that, as Stephen just mentioned a few moments ago, we will have the 2019 Safety and Security Policy Manual uploaded onto the website by January 1st. I also expect that the quick reference guides will also be uploaded at that time. If they're not, or if you want it early, though there's really not much of a change, I just kind of tweaked them a little bit. But if you do want the quick reference guides, you can certainly email one of us. Happy to send it to you. I'm just going to answer your question that I see there.
Oh yeah, I was going to say Susan Mosley had a question.
Typing a little bit. So it says if a streetcar is struck by an automobile and the automobile has disabling damage, how to clarify it. You report that as a rail collision, and of course you would include the streetcar and include the other vehicle, and then on the other, so you would include the damage threshold would be included because of the tow, and tow due to disabling damage. And then on the other vehicle form, you indicate that the vehicle, you corroborate that the vehicle was towed due to substantial, due to disabling damage. I apologize for my tripping up there. So it's just a regular rail collision, substantial damage, corroborating the towing of the other vehicle.
After Susan's question, there, Philip Moore.
That one. Thank
Okay,
you.
I'll read it out loud. So is there a threshold for damage in a revenue facility? Example, bus backs into another bus at low speed, or bus hits the side of the maintenance building.
Okay.
Also,
so
Anne, people are saying they can't hear you, so maybe, I don't know if you could speak up or
I'll try
just
speaking up a little bit louder. Can you hear me now? Someone confirm? I'm not muted.
Yeah, someone else. I don't know.
Okay, I'll talk a little bit louder. Somebody can hear. Okay, so Philip's question was, I gave an example of a bus. Let me scroll back up there so I can read it.
Oh.
Of a bus hitting into another bus at a revenue facility at a low speed, or a bus hits the side of a maintenance building. For non-rail reporting, Philip, the damage threshold is $25,000. Now that's only one threshold. There's several thresholds. Of course, we didn't go over all of that because this isn't like an overall, it's just a changes course. But there's a fatality, there's an injury, there's an evacuation threshold, there's a property damage threshold of $25,000 or more, and then there's the towing threshold of any involved vehicle. These are all non-rail thresholds. So if that bus hits another bus, regardless of where it is, or the bus hits anything, regardless of where it is, if it meets the $25,000 threshold, just as one threshold, then yes, it's reportable.
Okay, there was another question.
Laura, when reporting the damage, do we report the damage to our transit vehicle only, or the damage to all vehicles involved? That's a good question, Karen. It's to all vehicles involved, all vehicles, objects, anything that has to be repaired or replaced. So if it hits a fence, if it hits a building, anything that's involved. Thank you, Ray. I'm trying not to be too loud. Well, some can hear me and some can't. You may want to try adjusting your volume on your computer if you're listening through the computer. If there is a fire in a vendor-rented area of a revenue facility, is this reportable? No. When for multimodal facilities, and this is addressed in the policy manual any year, it has to occur in the area of that multimodal facility. So multimodal or multi-agency, either way. So if you're sharing with an Amtrak facility, you're not going to report something that happened over on the Amtrak platforms, for example. So no, you would not. It would have to be in the designated area for your bus or your paratransit or whatever the case may be. Yes, I see there's a little bit of a lag. I don't know what's going on there, but
There's something with the connection. I apologize. It's not my fault, but
no, I know. An automobile strikes a rail infrastructure such as the OCS pole and it's disabled, is it reportable? Again, we have to comply the substantial damage threshold. Now, the exclusions, if you look back to that slide, I'm not sure if I can remember which one it was. Well, let me see here. Oh, oops. Okay, so you'll notice that in the exclusions, it excludes the catenary lines. Now, your question specifies the pole. So I would have to say that perhaps the supporting structures are considered infrastructure. It has to hold up the catenary wires, but based on the exclusions, I guess the catenary lines themselves would not be included. Non-revenue vehicle is involved in an SNS 40 criteria. Okay. Raji, this would depend on where it occurred. So if a service vehicle or a police vehicle or a maintenance vehicle hits a car or something else out on a city street and it meets a reporting threshold, then it is not reportable unless for your for the non-rail side, it would not be reportable. Let me think about that. Well, I'm going to take that back. So within the overall applicability of an event, sorry, I lost my train of thought. I apologize. Non-revenue vehicle. Okay, if the non-revenue vehicle or maintenance vehicle is in the act of is performing a maintenance type activity when the collision occurred, then it would be reportable. Typically, that's not the case in most of our events that we see. So I'm going to take this on a more general level that your non-revenue vehicle, service, police car, whatever it is, had a collision on a city street, it met the injury threshold or some other threshold, no, you would not report it, just in general. Of course, when you have specific incidents, if you want to discuss them with your analyst, please call any one of us, and I'll be happy to discuss the individual event with you. This is mentioned on our quick reference guides, and I know people have a tendency to kind of rely on those, even though they're just a one-page, exactly what they say, quick reference. But please do take a moment to look through the policy manual. We have shortened it significantly over the way it used to be years ago, but it really does hit on these high points and how to address multimodal facilities and predominant use rules and all these kinds of things. So it's a great source of information for you and certainly worthy of a review. I see why we have some more typing. I'll just mention. We had a lot of questions when this course was notified or sent out. if it was an overall course, because some people are new. And obviously, it wasn't anywhere near an overall course. We will not be having the overall training sessions for rail and non-rail mode reporting until the spring. We're limited on the time slots we're allowed to have for the year, and we're typically given 2, sometimes 3. So the next session won't be until probably the April-May timeframe, unless we can get it earlier than that. So in the interim, if you are new, if you need training, if you want additional guidance, again, please contact one of the analysts. We can send you the presentation. We can go through step by step with you and do one-on-one personalized training. We do that all the time, so that's certainly fine to do that. And Lori, I'll just ask you because you know better than I. These
Sure.
are also reported, posted on your NTI website. There's a YouTube button in the upper right-hand corner. Does that have the old ones that we did back in 2018, our overall sessions for rail and non-rail on it?
It has a lot going quite a bit back, actually. There's a search button. I guess I'll just say the URL while we're talking about it. It's directly, you can go there, www.youtube.com, /user/Rutgers NTI. And when you get there, I think you'll probably see the most recent videos that were added, which are NTD webinars and also TCRP webinars that we also host. But if you hit the search, you can probably bring up the previous ones. There are some old ones on here. We kind of left an archive.
Thanks, Lori.
Sure.
Raj, yeah, I see you had a question about this, but that's fine. You can certainly email us later about this slide.
Are there any other questions? Going once? Going twice? Anne, Stephen, James, any parting last words?
Well, I just want to thank everybody for joining us, and again, just reiterate that Stephen, James, and I are here for you guys, and no questions too small. And please feel free to contact us anytime you have a question about reporting. We just as soon you ask us ahead of time rather than send us a report that you didn't need to report in the first place, and or some other issue like that, and then we have to send it back to you. Then you got to go back in and delete it and whatever. So please, it's no trouble. You're not bothering us. That's exactly what we're here for. Makes us feel useful. Thank you, everyone.
Yes, and I appreciate everyone's patience. I don't know what's going on with the sound and the connection and everything. I am trying to look into it. I wish I could say that this was an anomaly, but this has been happening more and more. So we'll work on it. We might not be using Adobe Connect for that much longer. We'll see. Anyway, thank you to everyone for your patience and participating this afternoon. Special thank you to Anne, Stephen, and James for your time and the informative presentation. As a reminder to everyone, you will be receiving an email with a link to fill out a survey evaluation. If you could do that, it would be great. We really appreciate your feedback. So thank you, and everyone enjoy the rest of your Tuesday afternoon. Bye.